Welcome to the Eclectic Philatelist. Can you guess what today's subject is? I love riding bikes. It's one of my main hobbies. I just enjoy getting outside and getting that kind of exercise. Currently own a couple different bikes. I'll throw up some photos of my current two bikes. One is a single speed, kind of a city bike for exercise around the bike paths in town. And the other bike is a new bike for me. It's an electric bike, which is a lot of fun. But today's subject is bikes on stamps and how to approach a topical collection of bikes on stamps. So let's get started. In the early 1800s in Germany, a man by the name of Karl von Drais started to experiment with human-powered vehicles. And partly this was out of necessity because in the early 1800s at that time at his location in Europe, horses were in kind of a short supply due to a string of poor harvests and a scarcity of animal feed. So he thought that a human-powered vehicle was certainly possible, and he started to build one out of wood. And the initial bike was something that came to be known after his last name, came to be known as the Draisine, also known as a hobby horse or a velocipede. And the bike actually did not have pedals. It was propelled by the rider moving their feet along the ground and kind of pushing the bike along. It was sort of uncomfortable. Of course, it wasn't very fast, wasn't very nimble or agile, but it was the start of really the first verifiable two-wheel human-powered vehicle. The next innovation that designers were really working with and trying to come up with various ideas that were the most efficient was a way to turn the front wheel. Again, most ideas back then were that the front wheel was the driving wheel. And the idea of some kind of pedal system came into being. And there were many people that experimented with some things. Here's a stamp from Mongolia, again, depicting one of the early designs. A few different people came up with this. One was an idea of a Scottish blacksmith named Macmillan, who came up with a treadle and pushrod sort of a system, where it was pedals that were attached to a pushrod would be operated like a treadle almost. They were more up and down instead of a circular motion. And then these push rods would go to the rear wheel and would turn the rear wheel. And as you can see on the stamp, the rear wheel was a large wheel in an attempt to give it as much speed as possible. It was kind of a clumsy system, but that's what they tried in the beginning. Here's another stamp from Mongolia that changed things up just a little bit here. The idea here was to not have the treadle system, but to have a way that you could rotate the wheel, the front wheel, and that would propel the bike. Again, it wasn't all that efficient. There was no gearing yet at this point in time. They did experiment a little bit with some gears to see if they could make it more efficient, but it was kind of a clumsy attempt at gaining a smoother pedaling system and some gears. The big thing that most people are familiar with is the development of the high wheel bicycle, also called the penny farthing. And the penny farthing was a bike that had a very large front wheel. Now this allowed the bike to go very fast, so that was the big advantage. It was the size of the front wheel was only limited by the length of the rider's inseam. So a very tall rider with long legs could have a very large wheel and go very fast. Unfortunately, the downside of the penny farthing was the accident rate of this machine because of the configuration of the rider sitting very high and almost on top of the front wheel. And the roads were very poor back in those days. And if you hit a rut in the road, typically the rider would go over the front wheel and crash, sometimes getting tangled in the handlebars. And research says that one of the most common injuries back then with the penny farthing was 2 broken wrists. So the penny farthing was kind of an idea that had its time, and they're still ridden today, and there are still groups of people that love the penny farthings and think that they're great books, great design rather. And so there's a club in England, as a matter of fact, that still recreates penny farthings and loves to ride those. But for most of the world, the idea was we have to do something that's got a little bit more safety. And then came the design of the so-called safety bicycle. And a safety bicycle brought the front wheel down to a normal size and tried to make both wheels the same size. But in order to do so, they had to have a more efficient pedaling system. And here's where the first idea that stuck with bicycles almost up until through the modern day, really, the idea of sort of a diamond-shaped frame where some type of a crank with pedals could be right underneath the rider in the center of the bicycle. And as you pedal, there would be a chain or in some cases a belt drive that would propel the rear wheel, making the front wheel easier to steer and the bike much more pleasurable to ride. Until more modern sets of gears were developed and ways to shift gears, it wasn't as fast as perhaps a penny farthing bike, but it was an idea for safety purposes, and hence the nickname, the safety bicycle. As bikes then evolved, of course, we got into gears that could be shifted either from the handlebars or from the down tube. Sometimes there were levers placed where you could change gears. Today it's gotten as fancy as electronic gearing where you push buttons or just touch a lever on the handlebars and the electronic signal is sent to the derailleurs and it shifts automatically. I don't know how long the batteries last, so that might be an issue there. But the modern bicycle then was around for a long time. The idea of a typical road bike, you see in the stamp here with the dropped handlebars and the gearing, and that brought bikes into the world of racing. Racing such as the Tour de France, and what prompted me to do this video this week was the current, as of the time of recording this video, the current Tour de France is on, and the racing is hot and heavy. They're into one of the earlier stages right now. But with racing, that could make also another part of topical collection because there's various types of racing. The Tour de France, for example, is road racing, but this next stamp shows a bicycle that's used indoors primarily on a track, an oval track. And these track bikes are fixed gear bikes, meaning that the pedals and the rear wheel are fixed with the gears. If you turn the pedals, the rear wheel turns. If you stop turning the pedals, the rear wheel stops. There are no brakes on these bikes for racing. They can be extremely fast. The rider needs to be very skilled, though, and quite strong to get that bike going from a start. And again, stopping can be tricky because you cannot coast on these bikes, being fixed gear bikes. Some of the other innovations also came about through racing, and the next stamp shows a time trial bike, and a very early example of one where the rear wheel was a disc wheel, and that's when we started to get into aerodynamics and speed due to aerodynamics and lightweight material and things like this. And that continued to help, and still to this day in the world of bicycle racing is where a lot of the innovation comes from. In the United States especially, and in some countries in Europe in the 1950s, the craze went in a little bit different direction for bicycle design. The space race was starting to be talked about. Countries, both the United States and Soviet Union, were going to space, and there was a lot of sci-fi movies and books out at the time. So then we started to get into designs that looked more space age. This is the photograph of a Bowden Space Lander bicycle made from fiberglass and designed from the 1950s. And of course it made its way onto a stamp, and that's where we have this next stamp showing a blue Bowden Space Lander, a very cool bicycle. Now, innovation didn't only occur in bicycles or the two-wheeled human-powered vehicles. Even back in the 1800s, there was a lot of effort to make bicycling more of a social aspect where couples could share cycling. Tandem bicycles or even side-by-side tandems were created. And here's a photo of a four-wheel device where a man and a woman could ride together, and kind of a Victorian era bicycle, or you could go on a date and go bicycling around the park in this vehicle. And of course, these early designs, of course, made it onto a stamp, kind of the next video here. And there's a lot more of these, and that too could be part of a topical collection. You could look at all these different historical human-powered vehicles, not just a bicycle, but also tricycles and quad cycles and things like that. They all make very good ideas for topical collections. So in building a topical collection with bicycles as a theme, there's many, many ways to go. My theme typically, or my idea for my collection typically, is the evolution of the bicycle, going from the original designs up to the more modern designs. You could also have a topical collection based on racing. I didn't show too many stamps from the Tour de France or that, but I have quite a large number of stamps to do with racing, especially with the Tour de France, and also quite a few with track racing. There's also bicycles as transportation around the world, and even in the United States now, more and more with the advent of electric bikes, we're seeing cargo bikes, bicycles that are used every day to haul packages, or even in some cases haul more than one person for business purposes. And that could be an interesting collection as well. So there's a lot of opportunity in bicycles on stamps. If you collect bikes on stamps, please let me know in the comment below. There's a lot to this hobby, and if you want to explore it and get a checklist of the stamps that are available, the American Topical Association would have a checklist that you could acquire, and that would help you find and locate the various stamps for your collection and your idea. Also, if you do collect bikes on stamps and have a different idea, like other than racing or transportation or something, of how you organize your collection, please let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear more about this. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. Happy collecting, and I'll see you in the next video.